My cousin and I were frequently visiting our grandparents during our summer vacations when we were children. That year was the same. I was around 12 years old and my cousin Shui was the same age. Shui and I were both really interested in pottery after seeing a program on TV. So when the program ended, he and I walked to the back of the hill to collect clay, then formed it. My cousin was a moron. He had worked all day and could only make a small bowl, but he was already satisfied. As for me, I could make a little human statue, which I was extremely proud of, and it appeared that I also had a knack for molding the statue. After that, Shui enticed me to build a kiln so that they would become pottery, just like on TV. So we started collecting bricks, stones, and soil. We found a lot of stones in the forest and were quickly able to construct a sturdy kiln. Finally, we split up and grabbed a large amount of firewood, which we placed inside with the bowl and the mannequin we created, fired and burned them. We were overjoyed to see the fire roaring, since it meant that we would soon be able to create ceramics as seen on TV. But as we were waiting for the fire to burn, I heard my mother's voice from the village calling out, "It's time to come home and eat." So I told Shui that we'd go back to eat together, but my grandma warned me not to play with fire in the forest, since it was extremely easy to start a forest fire. We decided to stop the fire for the time being. We stopped the fire, meaning to return the next day to do it again. We left the clay statue and bowl there. Unfortunately, after eating, my cousin was transported to the city by his parents due to business issues, so he had to follow them. Hearing that, I decided to go there and carry out our clay products to the grandma's house for preservation, and then proceed to fire them when Shui returned. But when I got closer to the location, I was taken aback, since from a distance it appeared that someone was standing there. Looking closer, there was a person standing next to our kiln. Did someone discover the items we made? Because I was young and simple, I immediately assumed that someone was going to steal them. So I went over and howled at the person to stop. It appeared to be a man. But when I went to the location, he had mysteriously vanished. There was no trace of anyone, most likely because I confused what was a man for something else. I didn't pay much attention either. Instead, I looked inside the kiln to see whether our clay items had been taken. Fortunately, they were still inside. So I reached inside, grabbed them, and began racing back to the village before it became dark, because it would be dangerous in the forest. Suddenly I heard footfall behind me. It got closer to me every time I ran, and when I stopped it slowed down as if it was following me. I stopped and listened, and everything fell silent except for the wind roaring through the rustling trees. It was now dark at this time, and in the forest was pitch dark. The wind had ceased, and the woodland had become eerily calm. Seeing this, I held the statues closely to my lap and continued walking, but my eyes continued looking behind me to see if I could figure out who was following me. I thought it was the man from before, and indeed, as soon as I looked behind, he was standing there, gazing at me. It was so creepy that I fled as fast as I could to the village without daring to look back. When I approached the village and saw two old men sitting and talking, I was relieved to take a breath. I was expecting the appearance of someone else who would make the other man abandon his desire to pursue me. But the shiver raced down my spine, and I had the feeling that someone was still watching me from behind, so I turned my head to look. A figure in the distance was still following me. I was certain it was the same man. Even though it was a long distance away, I still could see his face staring at me with angry eyes. For a youngster like me, this was too frightening. I didn't dare to stare any longer, but instead turned around and rushed home. I didn't dare to inform my parents that night for fear of getting scolded for starting a fire in the forest. I went to bed early and eventually forgot about the strange man. I was sleeping at midnight when I was jolted awake by weird noises and the room became colder. My parents were sleeping next to me when I gently opened my eyes. The sound of the door opening drew my attention and I turned to see when a figure slowly entered my room. He was moaning while walking in, his movements odd, twisted, and like gliding across the ground, his body blue-gray and cracked like dry soil. He went closer and closer to me. The closer he got, the colder my body felt and trembled. My body remained stiff at this point, and I looked over at my parents, who were still sleeping, but I had no way to wake them up. Only my eyes could move. The rest of my body was numb. Later on, when I was older, I realized it was sleep paralysis. The man stood next to my bed, his face deformed abruptly, his eyes were blood red. His mouth was wide open, his eyes were bulging with crimson veins, and his skin was cracked, which was too frightening. He stretched out his hand as if about to strangle me, and his mouth moaned and asked me to return something to him. When I was the most terrified, I heard my father's voice in my ear. He held my name loudly and shook my body. I felt it, but it was difficult to wake up. My eyes were still closed, but I heard my father calling, and he got up and grabbed for the light switch. When the light was turned on, I knew it was time that I could get rid of the man, so I opened my eyes to see the light in front of me. Mom and Dad were standing next to me, and they assumed I was having a horrible dream. They looked worried and asked me what I had dreamt of that caused me to weep in my sleep like that. When I saw my family at this point, all I could do was burst out in tears and told them about what Shui and I did at lunchtime, and then about the weird man. My parents were horrified when I finished. They immediately rushed to summon a famous shaman in the village. Miss Yang was old, but she was extremely skilled at these things. When she entered the house, she asked me about everything that had transpired and then looked around. She abruptly averted her attention from the bowl and clay statue that Shui and I had made in the morning. Miss Yang stated that in that forest there were many unresolved ghosts, and when I built a human figure, they went there to reside, so they didn't want me to take it away. Then my parents and Miss Yang set fire to a large number of joss papers in front of the house, close to that clay statue and bowl, and eventually put it back where it belonged at the edge of the forest in the kiln that Shui and I built. Miss Yang also assured my parents that if they put a butcher knife under my pillow, everything would be back to normal. But the next day, I had high fever that lasted many days, until I healed entirely.